This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer. It's 1 p.m. here in Washington, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thanks very much for joining us. We begin with breaking news. Former Donald Trump campaign aide Rick Gates expected to plead guilty to criminal charges in special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Our justice correspondent Evan Perez is outside the federal courthouse here in Washington. Evan, what are the details? Will Gates fully cooperate in the investigation right now? And clearly this has major implications for Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman.
That's right, Wolf. It has major implications not only for Paul Manafort, but also for this investigation, which, as we know, is looking more deeply into the Trump campaign and any contacts with alleged Russian operatives. In the next hour, we expect that Rick Gates will be here at the federal courthouse here in Washington to plead guilty. He's going to plead guilty to 2 criminal charges. One of them is conspiracy to defraud the United States, and the second one is making false statements. We were told, according to these documents today that were filed in court today, Wolf, that as recently as earlier this month, Rick Gates met with the special counsel and with the FBI, and according to the special counsel, lied about a particular meeting that he was being asked about, a meeting that goes back to 2013. So it appears that as recently as earlier this month, at least according to the government, Rick Gates was lying in order to protect other parts of this investigation, perhaps Paul Manafort. As you mentioned, Paul Manafort, who has pleaded not guilty in 12 counts here in Washington and 32 counts that he is now facing in Alexandria, Virginia, which were filed yesterday, Wolf. He says he's innocent of those charges as well. The pressure is now on him because Rick Gates is going to be a key witness. We expect that as part of this agreement, this plea deal with the government, Rick Gates is going to have to provide some information to the government, and that would obviously be very bad news for Paul Manafort. Until this point, Wolf, one of the things about this case is the government hasn't had really any witnesses, any big witnesses to use against Paul Manafort. That changes today at 2 p.m. when Rick Gates walks into this courthouse and he pleads guilty to at least these 2 charges. Now, we don't know all the details of what he is going to cooperate with the special counsel, but usually, typically in these agreements, you have to essentially say everything you know, and that has implications beyond Paul Manafort. We know, of course, that this special counsel investigation is looking at others inside the Trump campaign. And so the question is, what happens to Paul Manafort? Does he flip? And then does he provide information about others that are under investigation in the special counsel probe? Wolf?
It clearly is designed, at least in part, Evan, to put that kind of enormous pressure on Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman, to go ahead and cop a plea himself, to plead guilty, to cooperate, and hope for some sort of reduced sentence. I assume that's part of the strategy here.
Right. Right, that has been the strategy from day one. We've seen very, very aggressive moves by the special counsel, Wolf. Not only the 12 counts that were filed here in October, but yesterday they filed 32 counts across the river in Alexandria. These were tax charges. These were filing false income tax returns, failing to disclose foreign bank accounts. Again, this is a man who is about to turn 69 years old. If he's found guilty of these charges, we're talking decades in prison. He's going to die in prison if he is found guilty of these charges. We've heard a lot of bravado from Manafort's camp. They say that they're ready to go to trial. They're not only are they suing in civil court against the special counsel, saying that he doesn't have the jurisdiction to bring these charges, but they say they're going to go to trial. So obviously that's what we've also been hearing from Rick Gates. We've learned in the last hour that he sent a letter to some of his friends and family members saying that he had always intended to fight, but that he has changed his mind. Well, this has been a very odd situation here because we've seen Rick Gates come to court here in the last couple of days, filing paperwork for himself. We know that he had some lawyers and that he had switched to another lawyer to try to help negotiate this plea agreement. There was some question as to whether or not he would actually go through with that. And so in the last couple of days, there's been a bit of a guessing game as to exactly how this would go. And so today we know that he's going to come in here and plead guilty at 2 p.m., Wolf.
Yeah, the guessing is over as far as Rick Gates is concerned. Evan Perez over at the federal courthouse, thanks very much. Let's talk about this, get some analysis. Joining us, our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, and our CNN legal analyst, Michael Zeldin. He's a former federal prosecutor who worked very closely with Robert Mueller over at the Justice Department. Gloria, you've obtained this very personal, very serious letter that Rick Gates has written to family members and friends.
Yes, and you know, it gives you a little bit of insight into his thinking and the stress and the pressure that he has felt before doing what he's going to do today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the portion of the letter that we've received is addressed to our friends and family. And it says, given the news reports from last week, I wanted to give everyone an update about some events that will occur today. Since the indictment was handed down last October, there has been great pressure on our family, and these last several months have been excruciating. Last weekend, there were several news outlets that wrote false and misleading statements concerning my situation. Despite my initial desire to vigorously defend myself, I have had a change of heart, and that reflects Evan's reporting. The reality of how long this legal process will likely take, the cost, and the circus-like atmosphere of an anticipated trial are too much. I will better serve my family moving forward by exiting this process. The consequence is the public humiliation, which at this moment seems like a small price to pay for what our children would have to endure otherwise. I want to protect our family from further anguish and believe that ensuring their well-being is first and foremost. This is one of the most difficult decisions that I have ever had to make. Please continue to pray for us. And then the letter goes on.
Yeah, it's a very emotional letter from him explaining why he has decided to flip now and to cooperate, to plead guilty. And it sets the stage, Michael, for potentially a lot of pressure on his boss, the former Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, to do the same thing.
Exactly. You now have a very large amount of paper and electronic evidence against Paul Manafort. Now you have a witness who can guide the jury, if you will, through all of that evidence to say, I was there, I was on the inside, this is what we were doing, this is what this document means, this is what this computer file means. It makes it very difficult to overcome the prosecutor in a case like this. And therefore, Manafort has got to make the same sort of decision that Gates outlined in the letter that Gloria just read, which is, am I going to go to trial twice, because there's a Virginia case and a D.C. case, in the hopes of winning, which are almost non-existent in the tax cases and the failure to report foreign income cases, or am I going to flip and plead and cooperate? And I think the government really wants Manafort. I think what this is about is Manafort being able to explain evidence that the government has obtained, maybe through FISAs or otherwise, that they couldn't otherwise get into evidence without Manafort. I think Manafort is the key to unlocking a lot of what the government's case may be on the collusion, if there is collusion, and on the counterintelligence side of things.
And just some context, Gloria, Paul Manafort was the campaign chairman leading up to the Republican presidential convention. He was dumped afterwards, but for months he was directly involved.
He was at the campaign for 5 or 6 months. I should also add that he was in the now infamous Trump Tower meeting that Don Jr. set up. And
with Russians.
With the Russians. And that Rick Gates is important also because Rick Gates was in the campaign and then served. And so I think he bridges a lot of time periods that they're interested in. And you'll notice in the indictments, and you know this better than I, Rick Gates has always been described as kind of an accomplice, if you will, as the sidekick to Manafort. It was clearly directed by Paul Manafort in things that he did. And so it's very clear that he was involved at every level, but has intricate knowledge of what occurred.
Absolutely. And you're right to say that Manafort was laundering tens of millions of dollars, and Gates were was laundering single figures of single millions of dollars in money. So there's a difference between the two, but they were both together in what is clearly a conspiracy to defraud the United States government. That has been charged. That's count one, and he can walk everybody through that if Manafort goes to trial.
And the second count, the second charge is perjury.
The second count is a false statement, correct. Interestingly, back at a 2013 meeting between a lobbyist and a congressional member and Manafort. So when I read this, I think to myself, ooh, if I were Company A, who's named in this thing, and that's one of the lobbying firms, this is not a good sign for me either, because they've got that in the focus, because that's the lie that they picked.
And just to give it some further context right now, Manafort and Gates, they were serving as lobbyists, and they didn't necessarily register with the Justice Department under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is a crime. But they were serving as lobbyists, as representatives for the Ukrainian president at the time, who was closely aligned with the Russians and Vladimir Putin, and that's how it's been brought in to this whole Russia investigation.
That's right, and don't forget, that's where the large portion of Manafort's income came, was from that work for Ukraine, for the Russian-backed president, and that was where all his money came from. And when that spigot was turned off, that's when they tried to avoid taxes and hide their other income, right? I mean, that's how the scheme worked.
That's how the scheme worked in part two.
Yes.
In part one, they were just flat out laundering the fruits of their successful lobbying campaign. One is always asked, Wolf, the question is, why did Trump bring Manafort onto the campaign? Some say it was because of delegate counts. Others now are saying, well, maybe it's because of what Gloria just said. He has this connection to Ukraine, which has this connection to Russia, which creates the basis for the relationship that is alleged to be the heart of the collusion counterintelligence part. So there's a lot to be sorted out, which is why they need Manafort.
You could ask the question the other way. Why did Manafort want to join the campaign?
Well, that's a very good question.
I mean,
in light of the indictment.
It could be either, you know, that question can be asked both ways.
Yeah, he worked for the then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, who has since left Ukraine and is living in Russia right now, and very, very clearly pro-Russian. There's a lot more. Both of you stand by. We're going to continue to follow the breaking news, but there's other news we're following, including the president calling the former deputy who stayed outside the Parkland, Florida rampage a coward. We have new details in that investigation also. The governor of Florida, Rick Scott, announcing some dramatic new proposals after the shooting, including age limit in Florida on buying any kind of firearm.
Successful people have one thing in common. They read more.
1-3700.
An armed officer in every school. That's the demand right now from Florida's Governor Rick Scott, who today unveiled a long list of changes he wants made to Florida's gun laws. Listen.
Today, I'm calling for a mandatory law enforcement officer in every public school. These law enforcement officers must either be sworn sheriff's deputies or police officers and being present during all hours students are on campus. I disagree with arming the teachers. My focus is on bringing in law enforcement. I think you need to have individuals that are trained. Banning specific weapons and punishing law-abiding citizens is not going to fix this. What we have to do is we have to really focus on the problem. We've got to take all weapons away from people with mental illness.
Another big part of the governor's proposal is banning the sale of all guns to anyone under the age of 21. Right now in Florida, you could purchase an AR-15 style rifle, for example, at the age of 18. Our Kaylee Hartung is joining us from Parkland, Florida right now at the Stoneman Douglas High School. Kaylee, so what else is the governor calling for, and how soon does he want all of these new steps implemented?
Well, Wolf, Governor Scott wants $500 million spent on protecting schools in this state. He introduced this three-part plan to address gun laws, school safety, and mental health. This after spending a week talking with the students of Stoneman Douglas, the teachers, law enforcement, as well as leadership from state agencies and mental health experts. The bottom line is he wants to make it virtually impossible for anyone with a mental health issue or anyone who could be a threat to them or others to be unable to purchase or use use a gun. Let's roll through some of these points of his action plan. As you mentioned, he doesn't want anyone under 21 to have the ability to buy a gun. He wants there to be tougher background checks and longer waiting periods. And by the start of the 2018 school year, Wolf, he wants one law enforcement officer per every 1,000 students on a campus. That means Stoneman Douglas last Wednesday would have had 3 law enforcement officers for their 3,300 students on campus, as opposed to the 1 that they did. He also wants metal detectors, steel doors, and bulletproof glass put in on campuses, and he wants more dedicated mental health counselors on hands to help students through their problems. He also mentioned a ban on bump stocks and said he may abandon tax cuts to help pay for school safety. And students among those who made the trip to Tallahassee to speak with Governor Scott earlier this week, Wolf telling me they find this plan encouraging, but right now it's just words. They continue to demand action from the Florida state capitol. The governor has 2 weeks left in this legislative session to, as he said, work aggressively with lawmakers to make this more than words, Wolf.
And as you point out, Kaylee, the governor wants an armed officer in every school, but there was, as you know, an armed deputy at the Stoneman Douglas High School where you are, and that armed deputy not being hailed as a hero, quite the opposite right now. Tell us about that.
Well, Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel says he was devastated and sick to his stomach when he saw video surveillance that showed that one armed deputy on the school's campus get into position at one of the buildings on campus that day and stand there for upwards of 4 minutes as students and teachers inside the building were being slaughtered. He says Scott Peterson did not do his job that day. Per protocol, he should have entered that building, he should have approached the killer, and he should have killed the killer. Well, now Peterson is out of a job after more than 30 years on the police force. He's retiring after being suspended without pay. Governor Scott among those calling for answers. He says the students and the families who lost loved ones that day deserve to know exactly what happened.
Kaylee Hartung on the scene for us. Kaylee, thanks very much. President Trump used the word coward today when talking about that armed school or resource officer at the Stoneman Douglas High School. Here's more of what President Trump said.
But when it came time to get in there and do something, he didn't have the courage or something happened. But he certainly did a poor job. There's no question about that. He was there for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes. That was during the entire shooting. He heard it right at the beginning. So he certainly did a poor job. But that's a case where somebody was outside, they're trained, they didn't react properly under pressure, or they were cowards. It was a real shot to the police department.
Joining us now from Parkland, Florida, is Alfonso Calderon. He's a junior at the Stoneman Douglas High School, a survivor of that shooting last week. First of all, how are you doing, Alfonso?
Frankly, I'm tired, and not only mentally and physically from the hours of work, but because even though Governor Scott and the president are talking about change, there's still no laws being written, and I want that to be one of the principal issues, because of course, people want change now after students who are survivors had to speak out on it. But when is it going to actually be written? That's my question.
Did you know this deputy, Scott Peterson, the armed deputy who was at your high school?
I did not. I only saw him sometimes in the front parking garage, but apart from that, I had never seen the deputy on campus.
What runs through your mind, Alfonso, when you hear that armed officer stayed outside the school building and didn't go inside to actually confront the shooter, even though a lot of shots were being heard?
Frankly, it's heartbreaking, because when you're an officer, you say that you are going to dedicate yourself to serve and protect the public or whoever you are entrusted to protect. This officer did not do that. He failed the oath he swore by. Not only that, he ruined his career, he ruined his reputation, and now there are 17 kids who are dead. 17 kids, well, 3 adults, pardon me, but still, people died because of his cowardice. And I just want to say, people are going to try to push now more law officers, just like Rick Scott said, 1 per 1,000 students. That's not going to help. What we need to do is stop the shooter from being able to acquire the gun, not put more guns into the school, give more money to the NRA, and forward their agenda of a pro-gun America.
At this conservative political action conference that's going on here in the Washington, D.C. area, Alfonso, the president once again spoke about his plan to arm specially trained teachers. Listen to what President Trump said.
You would have a lot, and you would tell people that they're inside. And the beauty is it's concealed. Nobody would ever see it unless they needed it. It's concealed. So this crazy man who walked in wouldn't even know who it is that has it. That's good. It's not bad. That's good. And a teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
What do you think of the president's plan to arm specially trained teachers?
In principle, I'm glad that he's speaking about change, but still, I think that's a terrible idea because, frankly, teachers are meant to teach and educate students. Teachers are not meant to be military-grade soldiers. Teachers are meant to shape my future, help me throughout life, and educate me, even if they are undercover. That is still just funneling more money to the NRA, who is clearly not supporting our right to live. They're putting the right to bear arms over the pursuit of life and happiness, and I think it's fairly tragic.
As you know, the teachers and a lot of the staff, they are able to go back into the school as early as today. Students are going back, I understand, next week, maybe Tuesday. What are your plans? Will you be able to go back into that high school?
I hope that I'll be able, physically and emotionally, but I already know that, sincerely, I don't think that it's the right thing to do. I think this tragedy happened way too soon. They're trying to push to open the schools soon enough so the kids have to go back to school and will stop speaking out about wanting common sense gun laws. And that, to me, is disgusting. Because I'm trying so hard. I am pushing day and night because I want this country to still have the Second Amendment and still be able to bear arms, semi or fully automatic guns. Just, there needs to be some common sense. How can an 18-year-old who can't even buy a beer buy an AR-15? How can background checks be so loose so you can go to a gun show and walk out with the gun? There's no waiting period. There's no actual background check done. How can somebody who had the police reported to his house 39 times since 2010, who was autistic and got expelled from school for disciplinary reasons, be able to buy an AR-15 completely legally? I think that this is a ploy and they're just trying to force the kids and silence us. But I want to remind you all again, we will not be silenced because we are dedicated and we will continue with this movement and with the march in March 24th and all the other marches and rallies and committees and petitions, and we will be there at every single one at every turn. Because this is what's most important to us, saving kids' lives and honoring the ones who have sadly fallen due to terrible laws.
Alfonso Calderon, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Good luck to you, Alfonso Calderon, a survivor. Justin, we're getting past calls the shooter made to 911, talking about his very emotional state. We'll play that for you. We'll assess. Also, there's more breaking news. Moments from now, a former Trump campaign advisor expected to flip in Robert Mueller's special investigation, which escalates the... In a stinging rebuke, President Trump condemned the actions of an armed school resource officer who was on duty but stayed outside Stoneman Douglas High School as last week's shooting unfolded.
When it came time to get in there and do something, he didn't have the courage or something happened, but he certainly did a poor job. If that's a case where somebody was outside, they're trained, they didn't react properly under pressure, or they were cowards.
All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us, our senior political analyst, Mark Preston, our senior political reporter, Nia Malika Henderson, and our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger. What's your reaction, Gloria, to what the president said about the security guard?
Well, he didn't want to change the narrative that he has, which is that you need more armed people in the school. So when you had a security guard that didn't perform properly he had to sort of make it sound like, well, you know, this is one guy and you really need more people there who could back him up. And, you know, because that's what we heard from him at CPAC this morning. He was talking about concealed carry. He was saying that teachers love their students. It should be the teachers, therefore, who should protect them rather than this kind of a guard who may not know the students.
And we haven't heard directly from the guard yet. We don't know his side of the story. We know what the Broward County Sheriff, Scott Israel, said yesterday. He was heartbroken. He was sick when he saw all of these reports that security guard waited outside, never went inside that high school. The president was very forceful once again this morning in his speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference here in the Washington, D.C. area, and he accused the Democrats of wanting to take away Americans' Second Amendment rights to bear arms. Those are powerful. That's a powerful accusation that the Democrats will sharply reject.
And he certainly was throwing a lot of red meat to an audience that wants to believe that perhaps believes that. But that's not going to help solve the problem. The situation we're in right now is that both sides refuse to talk to each other. They talk past each other. And when you are in a situation like this and people say, the president needs to be a leader in this, you know, show some leadership, going out there right there and saying something like that only adds more fuel to a raging fire right now. And that is not leadership.
Neil, listen to this. Wayne LaPierre is the head of the National Rifle Association. He spoke at the CPAC conference yesterday on this issue of guns. Listen to what he said and what the president said afterwards.
It should not be easier for a madman to shoot up a school than a bank or a jewelry store or some Hollywood gala.
Why do we protect our airports and our banks, our government buildings, but not our schools?
We must immediately harden our schools.
We need a hardened site. It has to be hardened. It can't be soft.
We drop our kids off at school that are so-called gun-free zones that are wide open targets for any crazy madman bent on evil to come there first.
It's a gun-free zone. It says this is a gun-free zone. Please check your guns way far away. And what happens is they feel safe. There's nobody going to come at them.
So at least on those 3 points, the president was echoing what Wayne LaPierre said.
He very much is giving his talking point on this idea of arming teachers with concealed weapons from the NRA. And in many ways, this is his most detailed policy proposal, right? It's the one he talks about the most. It's the one he has sort of numbers, 10 to 20% of teachers. Maybe they would be folks from the military. So, yeah, in this way, he is echoing the NRA and even in some ways going further than the NRA, even though the NRA backs this plan. They mainly talk about security guards being there to protect students. So in that way, he's certainly on the same page. He is differing from the NRA in terms of raising the legal age limit to purchase some guns. So in that way, we'll see what he does. Is that something he's going to lead with, or is he going to lead with this idea of arming teachers, something that he ultimately probably wouldn't even have any control over? This would be a local and state issue up to, school systems, what they want to do.
The president thought his prepared remarks were boring, so he went off script. And at one point, he went after Senator John McCain, who, as you know, is suffering from brain cancer right now. Listen to this.
And except for one senator who came into a room at 3 o'clock in the morning and went like that, we would have had health care too. We would have had health care too.
Just 2 weeks ago, Meghan McCain, Senator McCain's daughter, said the president had personally promised her he wouldn't continue to attack her father, who is going through this really very serious crisis in his health right now.
He can't help himself. Honestly, this is someone who doesn't have any internal editing process. He feels that Senator McCain did something wrong to him personally, and he's not going to forget it, no matter what promise he made to Meghan McCain. And by the way, Meghan McCain just tweeted that she and her mother, Cindy McCain, are going to be on The View midweek next week, and they're going to talk about this. I mean, I think Meghan McCain wanted him to stop this, as any daughter would, and he just I mean, honestly, he can't help himself. It's the only reason I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, it must be very hurtful to hear this kind of rhetoric from the president. He's said things like that in the past, apparently promised that he wouldn't do it again. And it's the first thing I thought of when we heard him talk about John McCain in that way. I thought about what Meghan McCain had said and this promise that she apparently got from the president that he's now gone back on.
You know what's sad? I was in Iowa when President Trump said that I don't believe that you're a hero if you got caught in Vietnam as a POW, that you got tortured as a hero. John McCain's a hero, whether you like his politics or not. He's a hero, and the fact that Donald Trump can get away with this goes beyond Donald Trump. It goes to his supporters that think it's okay to talk this way.
They booed McCain in that, in that audience. They booed him, and here's a man who's suffering greatly. I mean,
if you want to boo him,
serve this country.
If you want to boo John McCain, because of specific policies or what have you, that's fine, okay? I mean, that's politics. What we just saw right there was not Donald Trump attacking him for his policies. It was Donald Trump, as you said, trying to get back at him because John McCain didn't support him. And that itself is terrible.
Yeah. All right, guys, there's more news that we're following coming up. A brand new 911 calls from the Florida killer. You're going to hear him describe his emotional outbursts and violent past. That and more when we come back. The Florida shooter calling for help. We're now hearing chilling 911 calls from the teenager who killed 17 people at Stoneman Douglas High School. Here's the report from CNN affiliate WPTV.
911 emergency. Hi, I was just assaulted now. Someone attacked me.
A call for help in Palm Beach County.
I don't know where I am. I'm new to the area.
By the same 19-year-old man who allegedly shot and killed 17 people at his former high school, Marjory Stoneman Douglas. After his mom's death, Nicholas Cruz and his younger brother moved into this Lantana trailer with the Deschamps family.
The thing is, I lost my mother a couple of weeks ago, so I'm dealing with a bunch of things right now.
According to 911 calls, even though guns were banned from the trailer, the Deschamps feared Cruz's outbursts.
He was in the backyard behind the fence digging for 15 minutes, and I'm positive that he hit a weapon. I'm positive that he hit a 9mm carbine in the back.
He put the gun in the head of his brother before, so it's not the first time, and he did that to his mom. His mom died.
911 records show at one point Cruz threatened to pick up a gun from Dick's Sporting Goods after a fight.
I got mad and I started punching walls and stuff.
Hitting the walls, throwing everything in the room, and then my son got in there and he said, "Stop it."
And then a kid came at me and threw me on the ground. And he started attacking me and he kicked me out of the house.
That very disturbing report from our affiliate WPTV. Those 911 calls came shortly after the death of the shooter's mother back in November. We have reached out to the host family. You heard they're in that report for comment. We haven't heard back from them, at least not yet. Joining us now from Los Angeles, CNN law enforcement analyst Josh Campbell. Josh, what can we take from these emergency calls?
Well, Wolf, it's another layer of heartbreak for the victims of the family members that went through this senseless tragedy. And I think they continue to be re-victimized every time we learn a new detail, a new clue that could have possibly helped stop this. You interviewed a short time ago one of the students who lived it, Alfonso, and I think he laid out some of the mistakes more eloquently than I can, talking about the signs that were there, talking about the tips that came into law enforcement, talking about the weapons. I think that we start to see, as you put this pattern together now with the latest calls, that it's very clear that we failed these kids and we have to do better.
Absolutely right. I got to learn a lot of lessons from this so it doesn't happen again. Josh Campbell, thanks very much. As President Trump gets ready to hold a joint news conference, his former campaign advisor is about to flip the Russia investigation and cooperate with the special counsel Robert Mueller. He just walked into court. We'll go there. Stay with us. On the same day, President Trump announced new sanctions against North Korea. His daughter and senior advisor Ivanka Trump arrived in Seoul to shore up relations with South Korea, among other things. Earlier, the president tweeted this: "My daughter Ivanka just arrived in South Korea. We cannot have a better or smarter person representing our country." I'm joined now by our White House reporter Kate Bennett and our CNN national security analyst Samantha Vinograd. Is this unusual for the president to send Ivanka Trump on what potentially could be a very sensitive diplomatic mission right now, shoring up relations with South Korea, knowing that she potentially could be very close to a representative from North Korea?
Sure, and who wants to tell the president that Mike Pence was actually already in South Korea as a representative? So him saying that about Ivanka was interesting. Yeah, I think Ivanka Trump represents this hybrid role where part of her is first daughter and sort of feels very flashy and almost celebrity, and yet part of her is senior advisor. And this is a very serious time, as we heard today. The president, we've imposed new sanctions. So she's going to exercise this diplomatic muscle a lot more than what the White House initially said, which was basically she's a winter sports enthusiast, which is why she's going.
I mean, there will be some symbolic moments, but substantively there could be some serious diplomatic moments as well, Sam.
There definitely could, and that's why we need an ambassador in South Korea that can work on these issues. Look, they're complex. There's a reason why under various administrations, whether Republican or Democratic, you go into a meeting with trained experts who have a background on the issues and approach them that way. And look, North Korea won the Olympics. Medal count aside, all of the press coming out of the Olympics is about North Korea playing ball, literally and figuratively, with other countries while continuing their legal program. So we really need a trained diplomat to implement these things.
And I assume she's being well briefed, Kate. The North Korean delegation at the closing ceremonies, the leader of that delegation will be Kim Young-chol, a top intelligence official in Pyongyang.
Yeah, this is also interesting with Ivanka Trump, considering the new security clearance rules that the White House implemented today. So it might be a show of force that, yes, she's still involved. She's still being read in. This is still an intelligence area where she has access. But certainly it's going to be a standoff. We're going to be looking at it the same way that when Mike Pence was there with Kim Jong-un's daughter, that everyone looked at that optics as well.
And she's leading this delegation. Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, is part of the U.S. delegation. Senator Jim Risch is part of the delegation. But she's the leader of this delegation.
She is, and that's really surprising. If she was going in her capacity as first daughter, that's great. Why not? But someone who doesn't have experience should not be leading a delegation to brief on diplomatic issues.
She also doesn't have full security clearances. She's working like her husband, Jared Kushner, with these interim security clearances.
That's correct. And her portfolio lately has been more about small business, more about entrepreneurship, women's issues, family medical leave. Exactly. So when her portfolio expands like this, it sort of feels, as you said, a little bit odd to include this massive issue that we have on our plate.
President
right
briefly
now.
At the end of his CPAC speech mentioned these new sanctions against North Korea. Very quickly, didn't speak about it, and then he suggested, well, let's hope for the best.
Right. I don't think we should really hope for the best when we have a nuclear armed state threatening to launch missiles at the United States. And I think that we need a careful plan. And what's clear coming out of the Olympics is we don't have one. It's not working. The sanctions are strong. They're unprecedented. But our diplomatic approach is incredibly haphazard. Vice President Pence agreed to a meeting with the North Koreans with no preconditions and then got snubbed.
All right, guys, we're going to watch and see how this unfolds. Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, did announce those formal new sanctions against North Korea. That's it. We're going to continue our special coverage moments from now.